Um, some thoughts on the occasion of Zizek's latest Substack on God Cries, Hamlet, etc. Um, so I tried to put together a complex thought. Maybe it can't be stated clearly quite yet. As a sort of recite in the sense of Blanchot, meaning something that's, I'd link up recite in Blanchot's sense, and it says just on the Wikipedia page a little account of it, which I think is fine so far as one is attuned to it. It's enough in itself if you're already kind of attuned to that kind of thing to get it. It's superimpose it over Aragnes, over Heidegger's event or Aragnes. It's something that's ongoing, that's stimulated out of a text as a sort of subtle intervention. So this question of the Trumpian moment, whether this is so everybody's so excited for to be playing a role in history all of a sudden, but here's the problem: the concept of history is inchoate, and in a way, this is why, for instance, with this recent work by I think it's excellent, by the way, this work that Gavellini, this apparently he's actually from Piedmont area, but that's a vineyard, has written, and he's making the rounds to all the universities, giving little talks. He was hosted by I guess one of his fosterers, Harvey Mansfield. I think Mansfield is not a particularly good reader of Strauss. I'm not against him per se, but I think he's kind of like the conservative version of Cass Sunstein. He's mostly like he plays some kind of social nucleus type of role in the Harvard Law School in such a way as to be very important in a way that's not really to do with the quality of his work on Strauss. But the Scabellini work is going right to the most important questions, I think. So, but since I think that's connected to the question of Zizek is raising here, insofar as Zizek is basically saying we've entered into history at this moment, and that means there's a derangement of the big other itself. But this would suggest that history is itself a kind of a priori over existence. Let's put it that way. Supposing there's existence, and then there's this concept of history, which is that history is singular, and there can be no knowledge of the singular, but there could be knowledge of, in Aristotle, for example, there could be knowledge of a singular, proper individual, one unrepeatable, just once, just this time, things. There can't be properly knowledge about them, Aristotle says. There can be knowledge about particulars under universals, or in Hegel, this immediate sense certainty in connection to Begriffe. Should it be Begriffen? I don't know. But to concepts. But because Hegel follows this pattern, it follows the path made by Kant, where you go from sense certainty of perception to Begriff concept. So the issue of history itself, what is history, is complicated already. And that means, how can we say there is a big other as though we had already decided on Aristotelian and basically Catholic um, laws of thought, the principle of identity, contradiction, excluded in middle, and then at great length, according to Schopenhauer and Heidegger, Leibniz is the first to really sort out the principle of necessary reason or causation. But if we have none of this axiomatic basis, as it were, of the laws of thought, and especially the first step of Heidegger is to withdraw and regard it with criticism this interpretation of the identity, that the thing can be self-identical. Then the same thing for the concept of history falls into great problems, and then you can't say, how can we say there's just one big other? So it's like, is it for all Americans, or is it a spatial issue? Is it a sort of Friedrich Ratzel issue in the sense Dugan uses? Is there some kind of, not in the Nazi sense, but in Ratzel's sense, a Lebensraum issue, that the land is alive and it has a chthonic energy, as also Jung uses this, understands things this way, saying that the stable people stayed in the middle of the country, and the most unstable people were attracted by this, the restless people were attracted by this chthonic energy of California. So that the ground is alive, and it somehow, or a more realistic example is just that the North and the South of America were based on different climates, and it was better for growing cotton and so on in the South, and better for industry in the North. But yeah, is Big Other something like that? Is it because it can be shown to be based on a particular thing, or is it historical? And what does it mean that history is moving? So how do you see how complex, and not just, it's true, I could organize the material much more neatly if I had thought through, rehearsed it much more, many more times. I could create a much more neat presentation, but I think that's actually would be more obfuscating and more obscurantist and more untrue than the real primary vagueness that Heidegger is always moving in. So, like, for instance, in the second Schelling book, Heidegger directly, second Schelling seminar course, at the beginning of the book that records it, Heidegger goes into this question directly. I've often references that I don't think anyone ever understood why that's important. I think it's to bring it into direct political usage. Even Dr. Phil, when talking to Trump, has used the word presentism and given his own definition of that, according to saying that we have to use the standards of the time rather than our own standard to understand, say, antebellum South slavery or so. I think that's also very questionable, that way of phrasing. I think the proper way of phrasing presentism is simply that everything is from the current moment, but then there's this extra addition: is that an interpretation itself? Because is there a point, an imaginary way of deciding what the current moment is? corresponding to this identity, or corresponding to some Aristotelian notion of time as the movement of night and day, and the clock. Clock time, as Heidegger's often saying, and is a way to bring it into a kind of correctness. We can always sort of correctly, not always, but we can kind of correctly understand clock time, and then we can say factically clock time always existed, but it's like, how was it how much was it brought to consciousness, how much was it understood, how much was it entered into. So it's at the beginning of the essay. Zizek uses this joke, which then brings up this, I think the primary core subject is whether Trump has brought us into history in some special way. But the complex issue I want to bring out is, if history doesn't actually exist, then what difference does it make? And how could he be a moment of arriveness or breaking history if there's no clarity of what actually a historical moment is? Because how could you draw the line and say, this is the liberal moment, this is the post-liberal moment, this is the medieval Christianity, this is the Athenian miracle, for instance. This is that. I mean, where does the Dasein that has its essence in the Athenian miracle, how does it show the border of that, and who does it include? It's very difficult once you try to get into the details. This is something, I mean, Strauss always says this, that everything interesting happens when you go into the details and beyond this. These simple statements of sort of lists of names of concepts. So the joke at the beginning is Putin cries because God says Russia will become a vassal state or protectorate of China. President Xi cries because God says, I think because God says America will ultimately triumph. I can't remember if that's how it goes. Supposedly this is a joke from Germany. And then Trump asks God, what about the future of America? And God himself cries. Apparently, Zizek's interpretation is then that God, as the big other, has been displaced by Trumpianism. So again, of course, a lot of people are happy of certain specific acts of Trump. There's a lot of big talk about Days of Thunder by Bannon. I'm inclined to the Stephen Kotkin view that the best interpretation of Trump is WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. I think they must have been legally forced to call themselves that. It used to be called World Wrestling Federation. But the point is, so here's the analogy I want to draw. Well, so first of all, what would the standard sort of ontic version of this be, supposing everything stays the same, supposing there's we're not in history, but we're just describing sort of particulars under ideas that are eternal, which could then be swept away in history. But the higher parts, the particular and the eternal idea, are stable, so we could always go back to them when history erases something or not erases them. Then the idea would be something like there's regimes, and one regime is the liberal constitutional regime of America and the Atlantic revolutions, and maybe it's fashionable now to throw in the Haitian Revolution, 18th century North Atlantic liberal revolutions and their constitutions, and then just say Democrats and Republicans, whatever their differences were, had an underlying unity in this regime type. There's all kinds of different accounts of what amounts to a regime, but this is one of them, and I think a simple way to look at regime in this sense is like Tsarist Russia to communist Russia is a regime change. Same people, same ethnos perhaps, different political or politeia type. I mean, that's the name of the republic, is the politeia, or it is sometimes translated the regime. So this idea of regime change seems to be the one that most fits this idea that the Overton window or whatever, at the edges everything circles around to the same in Democrat, Republican, and left, right, depending on how you orient it by the French Revolution terms or by some other orientation like the fight between the Bank of England and the nobles and the king and church. Some form of conservative and liberal, but specifically in this case, Democrat and Republican, both swearing to the Constitution, but in different ways. And then it's as though Trumpianism is supposed to break out of this underlying unity, and then therefore to break out of the constitutional regime as set, at least as understood for some period of time. Like if you look at what Adrian Vermeule says, then he'll say something along the lines of there were just like different ways of it. There was a stable way of interpreting the Constitution up until a certain point, which also I have a different version of that from Strauss. And I think I usually point to the 60s, like to I know it when I see it, pornography, subjectivity of Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court Justice, has said that when this values break down and then ultimately get to, I mean, it was already more than 20 years ago now that I think that Anthony Kennedy made those remarks about freedom is this right to define one's existence for oneself or something along those lines. Or liberty maybe is that, I don't know. But this idea of Trump as so then the regime would be God then in that sense, and whatever the regime, its values are, would be the big other. Somehow the so-called coordinates, as Zizek is saying in the article, the coordinates by which pass themselves off as neutral, but which then when the event happens, when the Trumpianism happens, then you see them in a different light. So I think so that's one version. There's a regime, something breaks it, there's kind of divisions within the regime that have the same, nonetheless, same underlying coordinates in the Constitution. They're fighting amongst each other, but on the same underlying the radical structure is the same, but then something comes in and extirpates the radical structure. And so that's what Trump is supposed to be, according to this. God, that's why God's crying, according to that joke in Zizek's interpretation. Now, what I tried to make as a incursion in also, I think, Agamben. So I haven't been able to understand Agamben yet. I think Agamben is his crib essay, his crib and the fable essay is very interesting, but I can't quite understand what it means. It has something to do with incursion into history in a way that you can look and see what's happening in somehow that you couldn't see it before. It also has to do with something about Vanhoffen and the ethereal and a change in. It reminds me what Agamben is doing with Zizek's remarks about Lacan says Oedipus did not have Oedipal complex, but Hamlet did. In the same way, it's like Pausanias, or this sort of travel writer of the 2nd century, who talks about esoteric initiation rites, was talking about something different than Christianity, because it had it was esoteric, whereas Christianity is supposed to happen in historical time. um, and in a way to be out in the open, the virgin birth and the whole manger scene. And Agamben says the only thing that was kind of hierophantic about it or non-historical about it is the three wise men coming according to the following the star, which was a kind of miracle. But I think so. In this sense, I think this juxtaposition that Zizek is making again of the Oedipus and Hamlet seem sort of in there. But let me read one thing from Kafka. The first line of the trial, it makes me think of this too, because that's also Agamben's dealing with Kafka a lot, which is very has potential for some opening up some kind of raw avenues, maybe. Jemand musste Joseph K. Lumdit haben. Joseph K. Someone must have slandered Joseph K. Den on das etwas Böses getan, so without having done anything wrong, würde eines Morgens verhaftet. He woke up to be arrested. This sense of whatever's happening right there in historical time, and yet being somehow unheimlich or uncanny. That's where we link into this Heidegger's thinking to some extent. Heidegger unheimlich. I often think unheimlich is the highest word for Heidegger. No way. Because, and also he says that of Wittgenstein. He says Wittgenstein is unheimlich, which it seems to me it must be the very high compliment of Wittgenstein. And he uses unheimlich to translate Greek thelmazein in Aeschylus. The word, of course, associated with Socrates and at least one version of the B. I think there's a different version of the beginning of philosophy in Plato than in Aristotle. But in any case, one version is philosophy begins with wonder, of course. So if let me try to make it cleaner by just looking at it from Hegel's point of view. So, one, I want to say what Trump seems to be analogous to in Hegel is the evening glow. So, right before the end, the evening glow, which corresponds to me to the first as tragedy, then as farce. Something shows itself, but in the evening glow, in the evening colors, is sort of an absurdity. And the night owl of Minerva comes out and gives us full knowledge. But what would let's superimpose that over what Stephen Hawking said. There's liberalism, and then you say, was liberalism all the time this ridiculous WWE entertainment front? So Carl Schmitt had said Leo Strauss interprets Schmitt to say that what Schmitt really opposes the most, but he can't say it directly because it somehow loses its sense if he said it too directly. But what he really opposed the most was the entertainment culture, and the culture where real seriousness couldn't obtain. And he proves that textually to some extent. And I think also Carl Schmitt agreed with Strauss's reading. So that here we have, it's as though in the evening glow, Trumpianism is revealing that all the time liberalism was a front of entertainment. So like Stephen Hawking says, the whole of Trumpian's policy could be interpreted as sort of men with face masks, face paint and costumes, like World Wrestling, Macho Man stuff, who are really just have this vast skill of absorbing our attention. Days of Thunder, um, like like uh, like no other Trump is able to kind of absorb the attention to this mindless entertainment. And this is the evening glow picture, but then we could expect when Trump goes away to finally have the revelation of what liberalism all the time was. The owl would come out. But the problem is, but then that's what I want to say. It's not clear at what level this is supposed to be happening. So I think um, the scientific version of knowledge is a deeper problem in connection with Heidegger's technological essence than is this problem of what liberalism is. I think that's more like the froth in a way. But then how to make the connection? And then there's all these questions, which still, yes, I can't, I could, if I had, yeah, we could keep going through this until we made it neater. And then there would be a question like, is when Zizek speaks of the big other as God crying because Trump is the one out, and because the God was the God of the liberal order, and the thing that's made the liberal order invisible until the evening came and started to show itself as what it was, and therefore it loses its power. Is this yeah, this is all the time a problem where is the big other the real big other in this Lacanian sense, or the imaginary big other, or the symbolic big other, or what? There would be all these stages, and then there would be all kinds of further analysis, and then Lacan would go on for every year or so. Lacan would come out with another seminar, and he would be saying the previous Lacan was wrong about this. He hadn't got to the bottom of it. So where's the avenue of invasion here? Where can we get the raw objectivity of the matter? No, where can we get the recite to stimulate our access? Where can we find the leap in the Kierkegaardian sense? This is the kind of question that I think that Heidegger is always, he's trying to find a turn of the object of the Zizek is talking about, this deranged Hamlet object. The thing is unscrewed. It's out of I forget the Shakespearean phrase, but so just to reiterate, it could be that Trump means that the liberal order as underlying unity in one sense has been broken up. But then if the deeper essence of it were, for instance, a dominance entity based on control of capitalism, I would say Trump has quickened it. And so it may become more revealed, but it will also become stronger, so that it will turn out, okay, then we find out liberalism wasn't really ever in control anyway, but instead the law was always, this is one of Agamben's big points. The law is, whoever controls the exception controls the law, and then actually there is no law. So Agamben opposes the idea that there's a 0 point of the law, but rather he said there is no law. There's just anomy, because the law is nomos in Greek. So anomy is the deprivation of law, but really it's like non-law. Instead, there's something that's being used to dominate people for private interests that's being called law, but it's not really law. I think that's part of Agamben's view. So maybe it could be that through Trump this will become more clear once Trump dissolves into the dustbin of so-called history. But so far as it's the same problem with history with evolution. If there's not really a constant upgoing, as Nietzsche realized, but just a constant becoming, then there's not really history in Hegel's sense of building up to the absolute, but rather there's no alpha boom because it's just something changed. So the fact that something changed, you could present it as though there was a complete system, and then this system was raised up and destroyed and became something higher, and that's also a complete system, or even the absolute and most perfect point. But it doesn't seem to hold it once you start to look into the details. So I'll just say that's a good. This is sort of a good provocation and connection to, I think, the Ghibellini questions of Strauss's. How does Strauss understand nature? Because nature, for Strauss, stands in contrast with history, and that's why. So Strauss calls Heidegger, I think, somewhat wrongly, a historian or a historicist, and he kind of uses historicist and existentialist as synonyms, but that really Heidegger isn't a historicist because I guess I'll put it this way. It's similar to, well, one, the way sort of these imbeciles, I think, the Graham Harman type of people talk about correlationism, whereby they just keep insisting Heidegger is doing something he's not doing. But it's in a much more difficult way. You could say that of Strauss. When Strauss says revelation is a specific kind of rationality. So there's two kinds of rationalities. There's one that goes towards science and knowing in what the human being as man as man can know. But then Strauss says sometimes, well, if it were the case that science were the last word, science understood as fact as against norm, or fact as against value, as is stated in the earlier versions, closer to Nietzsche, and that science can only tell us about the facts which have no moral content, then we're justified to fly from this kind of science to faith. And then Strauss concludes revelation in this sense is rational because it's a decision based on something that makes sense. But then that's taking, I think Strauss is totally aware of that, but that's just but when we look at it that way, we're looking at it from a determined frame of rationalism rather than from the direct frame of revelation. Presumably, if you're Muhammad, then yeah, you don't go through those. It's just that something befalls you, and you, or if we're Minos in the cave of Crete, revealing the law, the revelation is something that befalls you, and it's not the result of your ratiocination. So we're just beset by all kinds of problems, and I insist that it's not because, I'm not clear enough, or I could have clarified the material better. I could have, it's true, but no matter how clarified it would be the same, something would give. And then it's this question of how do we enter into this material in a way that's it's unspeakable what we're even trying to do.